How much bureaucracy and red tape will be there in the process of rebuilding Los Angeles? My guest today is Mott Smith, who's a developer that knows the city and county of LA pretty well. He knows how the bureaucracy works in the system, and he's here to tell us what the city needs to do to expedite the process.
I have colleagues who have finished a building, an apartment building, and had to wait 6 months for the power company to come and flip the switch and turn the power on. And so during that 6 months, they're paying mortgage payments, they're paying insurance payments, they're paying their staff.
I'm Siam Akurami. Welcome to California Insider. Mott, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
It's great to be here. Nice to see you, Siamak.
You know, it's a tough time for LA. We just had the fires, and you have been in development field for many years. We want to hear what would be the process moving forward, in your opinion? What's coming next for people?
Well, so there are a few things. There's how do we deal with the immediate emergency, which is all of the people and businesses that have been displaced from the burn zones. And so this is creating a shock in the local market. There are families who own homes that have been destroyed that have to find new places to live. There are renters in homes that other people own that now have to find a new place to live. There are small businesses that were the anchors of community that have been displaced. And there have also been people who had jobs at those businesses who don't know what they're going to do. And there are countless domestic workers, gardeners, babysitters, people like this, who are out of a job right now. And so dealing with that is the immediate emergency. After that, we have to worry about the cleanup. This is probably, I think, going to be the biggest single bottleneck in the rebuild process, is the way that we do inspections and certify properties for rebuilding is not built for an emergency of this magnitude. It's really built for much smaller events. So that's a thing. And then finally, there's how do we rebuild the communities that have been destroyed, and how do we absorb on a permanent basis more people into the communities around those areas, outside of the burn area. And all of those processes are going full speed ahead at the same time.
Now, can you tell us about the cleanup process? Because there's a lot that needs to, can you tell us what it looks like?
For sure. So there is an inspection process that's ongoing right now to determine of all the buildings that were in the burn areas, are they completely undamaged? If you look at a map of the burn area, you'll see those designated black. They're the ones that are partially damaged, which you'll see yellow in the burn maps. And then they're the ones that are a complete loss, which are red, basically red tagged buildings. And this is a slow and arduous process that is ongoing right now of determining the level of damage to each structure. And then beyond that, there are toxins and other issues with the actual properties that suffered burns. And that requires environmental investigation. It requires professional cleanup. The government is able to do some of it. People are able to do it privately as well, but they still require public inspections to make sure it's been done properly before building can happen. And we just don't have a ton of people in the various government agencies to oversee this, to do it on an expeditious basis.
And to redevelop these, what would it look like? What would be the process to redevelop this? The whole city has to get rebuilt, or?
This is the question that everyone is struggling with. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone from the families that have suffered these losses to the local government agencies that oversee building to the general contractors and architects, all the way up to the states and the Fed. Nobody really knows what this is going to look like yet. But if your property was lost, which, huge swaths of these communities, the majority of properties were completely lost, for the next 2 years at least, you're going to be somewhere else, either temporary housing, or you're going to decide you're going to move somewhere permanently. Your kids are going to make new friends at school. You're going to sort of set down roots. Are you even going to want to go back to that place that was burned down simply because that's where you were before? In cases in the past where there have been large displacements, and a great example of this would be like the Century Freeway project, when we built the 105 freeway. There were several thousand households that were displaced to make way for that freeway, and there were huge public programs built up to provide replacement housing and to build new housing and to invite the people that were displaced back after the fact. And a majority of people who were moved for that freeway didn't want to come back. They set down new routes, even though they had the right to return to their to the area that they came from originally. It wasn't worth it for them. And I think we're going to see a similar situation here, where a lot of people may be in temporary housing right now, but that may translate to permanent replacement housing in a matter of months. I think a lot of people are going to get on with their lives, and so it's probably going to be new people for the most part who are coming back to these burnt out properties.
And now, Mott, you have done development in LA. So how is it? What's the process like for this to get rebuilt? You've seen a lot, right?
So development occurs in a few stages, and I'll describe it starting from the top all the way through to the end. So the first stage is the planning level. And this is where planning departments set out the general plans for their cities, for their communities. They create zoning ordinances that city councils or county boards of supervisors approve, and that defines what they call the envelope of building. It says these properties will be for single-family homes, these properties will be for apartments, these properties will be for commercial uses, et cetera. And
the shopping centers and different
office buildings, whatever it may be. And I'm not a big fan of this process, if I'm being honest. It's a relic of the 1920s progressive era in the U.S., when we thought that we could sort of, color in bubbles on a map and create reality this way. All that process does is describe, if I'm a builder, when I show up and try to pull a building permit for a project, if the project that I'm applying for fits into the categories of that color that was drawn on the map, then I can go straight to the counter that gives me building permits and then start that process. If I'm trying to build a commercial project, or let's say I'm trying to build an apartment building in a place that's colored in, for single-family residential, I have to go get a zoning variance, or I have to go get a zoning change, or I have to do something like that. So now I'm looking at a 12 to 18-month process to be allowed to get to the starting point of my building permit. So when we talk about entitlements, which is a word that we'll hear a lot in the coming months, entitlements means, am I entitled to get a building permit without this additional discretionary process that a planning department oversees? And that discretionary planning process, the entitlement process, is very slow, it's very expensive, it's very subjective. It's very hard to know when you start that process if you're going to get a yes or a no at the end of it. And that stops a lot of people in California from building homes. Because a lot of the land is not zoned in a way that works economically for the sorts of projects that could be built. And so builders have to say, I'd like some changes to the zoning. I'd like a little bit more height, or I'd like a little bit, lower parking requirements, or whatever it might be. And then I could do a building. But if we don't fix the entitlement process for the rebuild areas, it's going to be a year or more before a lot of people can even get to the starting line of asking for
building to what it was there.
There are basically two big sets of rules that govern what you can build. There's the zoning, which describes
if it's single family, if it's commercial,
what we call the use. Yeah. That's right. It's both the use and also the envelope, the shape of the building that's allowed. Can it be tall, or does it have to be short? Can it be all the way to the sidewalk, or does it have to be set back? Those are zoning sorts of rules. And then there's building code. And building code is more about, is it structurally safe? Will it stand up in an earthquake or a windstorm? Is it fireproof or not? How many toilets do you have? How many sinks do you have? Those are building code issues. And the building code changes every several years, and zoning code changes more slowly than that. But most of the buildings that were in a place like Altadena and frankly, Pacific Palisades were built under old code regimes that if they were to be rebuilt today, would have to look very different. They'd have to have different kinds of windows, they'd have different heights, they'd have different, just different configurations overall. And one of the big challenges to rebuilding is if I say you lost your house, you can rebuild exactly what was there. Your house might have been from 1935, and the building code of today is different than that, and so there has to be some negotiation about that. And the thing that really causes processes to get stuck is that kind of uncertainty, that kind of negotiation, where we say we'll issue an executive order that says you can rebuild exactly what was there, but people haven't fully thought through the conflicts with other laws and other rules that represents. And our our bureaucratic culture in California and in Los Angeles in particular is what one might call a culture of no, where the default answer to everything is no, you can't do that. If there's a conflict, try again. And that's distinct from other places like, Chicago is a great example of this. I would say their building culture is a culture of yes, where if you say, I'm trying to do this, can you help me? The bureaucracy there tends to be much more thinking about solutions rather than thinking about how to stop you. And I worry that our culture of no is going to get in the way of the sort of creative thinking that we're going to need to move through that uncertainty as we rebuild.
Do you think it will cost a lot more to build with the current code versus what it was there with the old code, like from the...
Yeah, very much so, very much so. I mean, every so often we do these code updates, and they're well-intentioned. For example, California has what we call Title 24, which are its energy efficiency requirements and accessibility requirements. So it says, you must have certain kinds of insulation, and you must have, windows that provide for certain, UV filtering and things like this. And every year, or every so often, we ratchet them up, and we just think, oh, well, let's get a little bit more out of the industry. And we're at a point today where it is significantly more expensive than it was to build even 5-6 years ago, and vastly more expensive than it was to build back in the 80s or the 70s when a lot of the homes in Pacific Palisades were built, and vastly more expensive than what was the case when a lot of those homes were built. Now, a lot of the things that we have ratcheted up in the building code that have added cost are good. These are fire life safety considerations that make buildings safer, make them more resilient, make them more energy efficient. Some of them are a lot of cost without a lot of benefit, because during the code update process, it's really a bunch of regulators and engineers who get together and say, wouldn't it be nice if? And there isn't a lot of input from the industry on the other side saying, that would be nice, but it's going to triple our costs. How about we do it this way? So that's something that I'm hopeful is addressed in the current legislative session. There are some bills that are on the dockets right now that would create a better conversation around code updates, that would invite architects and engineers from the private sector into the state.
And do you think there's a difference between building Palisades and Altadena? Is there a difference?
I think we are going to see two different processes play out. One, both communities had a bigger variety of household wealth profiles and income profiles than you might think. I mean, it's easy to say Pacific Palisades was rich and Altadena was middle class, but there were fantastically wealthy people in Altadena, and there were very middle class people in Pacific Palisades who've been impacted by this. The biggest difference, I think, is going to be that one is City of LA and one is County of LA, and it's two different bureaucracies that are going to be overseeing the rebuild. Also, the economics of Pacific Palisades will probably, my guess is that some of the very wealthy people who are impacted in Pacific Palisades might be less price sensitive than some of the people in Altadena who might be relying more on insurance payouts, et cetera, for their rebuilds. And so we might see more activity sooner in Pacific Palisades than we're going to see in Altadena. And I also think that the city of Los Angeles is a little bit better prepared in the bureaucracy to process this level of permitting. I think the county is more understaffed than the city and has a more cumbersome process than the city to get things through. And so I think the challenges are probably greater in the county right now.
Now, Mott, you mentioned the word bureaucracy. Can you tell us what does it look like? Can you give us an example?
Sure. Okay. So again, if I'm a builder, I want to build a home. I show up at the city or the county with my roll of plans, and I want to get those approved for building. I have to apply for a permit, and I have to get what's called a plan check. And the plan check will first determine, does my proposal match the zoning, which is, is it single family, is it multifamily, is it a certain height, is it a certain setback, whatever it is. And then if the answer to that is yes, I wipe the sweat off my brow and I go straight to the building counter. And then an engineer at the building counter or a series of engineers will, over the next maybe 6 months, do what's called plan check, as I said, and they'll go through all of my drawings and they'll say this. They'll get a red pencil out and say this isn't to code and this isn't to code, and I have a question about this. And then 6 months later, I show up and I take them back and I bring them to my architect, and then my architect will address each of those concerns. And 3 days later, if I've got a really good responsive architect, I'll bring it back, and then 3 months after that, if I'm lucky, they'll come back with a new set of red circles. Or they'll say, you're ready to issue, meaning your building permit is ready to issue. And so at that point, I pay my fees and I start building. And so during the construction project, there are a series of inspections. So if I have something to demolish, then I'll demolish everything and somebody will come out and say, yep, it's demolished. And then when I frame up the house or whatever building I'm building, I'll call for an inspection and the inspector will look and they'll say, that's good. I don't like the bolts you used on that. I want you to redo that. And so my contractor will redo it. And that's sort of how inspection goes. So it's an ongoing thing.
And then each time you have to wait probably for some time or...
Yes, it depends. I should say City of Los Angeles has traditionally been quite good on that. The county a little bit slower. But you usually, again, in the City of LA, it's just a matter of days that you usually have to wait for inspections. The big challenge with inspection isn't so much waiting for the inspector. It's more the culture of the inspection units. There's some jurisdictions, even here locally, where inspectors view themselves as your partners in getting a good, safe building built. And they'll see something that they didn't like, and they'll say, hey, tell me why you did that. And you'll say, here's why. And they'll say, oh, okay, that's fine, go ahead. Or they'll say, I want you to redo it, and but when I come back for the next phase, I just want you to show me a picture that you did it, and you're going to be fine. That's a good sort of relationship with an inspector. Sometimes inspectors will show up looking for a reason to say no and leave, and they'll look at your framing and they'll say, I don't like that. I have 10 other things I'm going to inspect, but I'm not doing those until you show me that's right. So I'm out of here. And so that's a situation where that can really draw out a project and create a lot of animosity. And we need to make sure that our building inspectors, both at the county and the city, adopt much more of a constructive, helpful attitude rather than that
partnership,
kind of like a partnership.
Coming in.
Yes, exactly.
Especially in this situation because there's so many houses that needs to get rebuilt.
Exactly, and so another piece of bureaucracy that's very relevant is public utilities. Everything that is getting rebuilt right now is going to need electrical hookups. It's going to need water hookups. It might or might not need gas, depending on whether people are rebuilding with gas. And working with those utilities can often be a huge challenge and a huge delay in construction. I mean, I know I have colleagues who have finished a building, an apartment building, and had to wait 6 months for the power company to come and flip the switch and turn the power on. And so during that 6 months, they're paying mortgage payments, they're paying insurance payments, they're paying their staff, and they're not allowed to make money from people paying rents or provide housing to people who need it because they're just waiting for somebody to come, flip a switch. So that type of coordination is it's absolutely key to a successful rebuild after the fires.
So these have to be really addressed in this process.
They have to be addressed. And the thing that is tough is a lot of this is in the weeds, as they say. A lot of this is nitty gritty, getting the power company's truck out to your place on Tuesday. It's not the sort of stuff that an executive order can solve. It's the sort of stuff that you really need a person who views their job as making things work, and who's given a broad mandate. You need that. You need individual accountability.
So the culture has to be a service culture in these government organizations.
It needs both to be a service culture, and there needs to be, as I say, more individual ownership of entire projects. I'll give you an example. Early in my career, I worked for the LA Unified School District when we were engaged in a $2 billion massive school construction program. And when I showed up, the district had spent about $300 million on consultant studies and planning reports and hadn't built anything. And the school board changed over and a whole new team of construction experts came in. And the one change that they made, which made all the difference in the world, was to go from a bureaucratic culture where a school project went from desk number 1 to desk number 2 to desk number 3, and as long as you didn't make a mistake, you didn't get in trouble, but nobody ever had to finish anything. Going from that culture to one of project management accountability, where each school project became the personal responsibility of one human being who would make sure that everybody at each of those desks was doing their job, and that human being, that project manager, lived or died, as it were, by whether the thing got built. Not by whether people did their job perfectly at each stage, but about getting the whole thing to work. And so adopting that kind of project management ethos in our city and county bureaucracies is going to be extremely important.
So a sense of responsibility and a sense of service.
A sense of responsibility, a sense of service, yes. One of the great challenges in our state right now is that we're still operating under the kind of planning regime that Herbert Hoover, when he was Secretary of Commerce, before he was president, put in place, which is how you build single-family suburbs with cul-de-sacs and that sort of thing on virgin ground. Like that was Herbert Hoover's contribution to our modern built environment, was the modern American suburb. And our city agencies and our county agencies are pretty good at approving those. It doesn't require them to bend their thinking at all. If somebody shows up and says, I've got this single-family subdivision, it's only single-family, it looks like this, we know how to say yes to that. But if somebody comes in and says, I want to do this in more of a traditional street grid, or I want to build some mixed-use buildings, it requires the agencies to think a little bit differently, and they're just not good at doing that. Back in the 1990s, the city of Los Angeles looked at downtown LA and saw all of these vacant buildings and, on the other hand, a big need for housing, and passed what was called the Adaptive Reuse Ordinance. And it was recognizing that people would convert these buildings to housing if we fixed some dumb rules that were making it economically impossible and kind of architecturally impossible to do it. And passing the ordinance was step one. Generated a lot of activity and a lot of interest, but what the key to making it work was they hired a guy who was the adaptive reuse czar. His name was Hamid, and I think it was Hamid Bedad, if I'm remembering correctly. And Hamid, his sole job was to make sure that those projects worked.
And he was in the city.
He was in the city. And without Hamid being the champion of all those projects, I don't think it would have succeeded. Because bureaucracies have cultures, and they have almost like minds of their own, and they don't change their habits easily or willfully. Unless there is somebody who really is putting a lot of positive pressure on them to change, they don't change. And so I would argue that the two things that made adaptive reuse successful, and I say it's successful because thousands and thousands of units were created as a result of this, and downtown Los Angeles was totally revitalized as a result of this. The reason it worked was both because the law changed to make it possible, and a human being who cared was put in charge of making sure it was successful. And so that we're going to need that same kind of two-step process for the fire rebuild.
So we need the champions in the city and the county to come out and
100%.
do the work behind the scenes.
That's right. It's not enough for the governor or the mayor to issue an executive order. That's a nice start. But we're going to need enabling legislation to make the rebuild possible, and then we're going to need individual champions to make sure that that legislation actually succeeds.
We are honored to be sponsored by Shenyun. I've been attending Shenyun performances every year as they change the choreography and music. Shenyun takes you back in time to the magical world of ancient China with unique blend of brilliant dancing, beautiful costumes, and legends coming to life. Overall, it's a very meaningful performance with a lot more than just entertainment to offer. Make sure to go see it this year. Go to shenyun.com and book your tickets today. I highly recommend it.
People nowadays go to the doctors, the psychiatrists for pills, for antidepressants. This is the antidepressant, the best.
I knew it was going to be good. It's a billion times better than I even thought it would be.
I'd heard people say, you don't want to miss this, and I would fully agree.
I'm going to tell everyone to come see it. You have to.
Definitely going to come back next year.
Totally inspirational. You have to go see this.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime must-see that will change their lives forever.
The city is challenged by losing some tax revenue in the middle of this. Like, they probably will lose a ton of tax revenue, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Billions of dollars of property value is going to go untaxed for some time, which has to have a huge impact on county finances. I mean, your property taxes go to the county, so that's where it's going to be felt. However, the county is the provider of last resort for so many safety net elements of our region. I mean, our schools get funded through property taxes. A lot of fire protection gets funded through property taxes. Public safety, relief for people who are suffering from homelessness. So this is going to be a big hit that we're going to have to contend with.
So how did Measure ULA impact the situation in LA?
It's a great question. Measure ULA was put on the ballot in November of 22, and it was billed misleadingly as a mansion tax. And the idea was we've got lots of low-income families that need help. Both they need affordable housing and they need help if they're getting evicted from housing that they're in and things like this, all of which is true, by the way. But the proposal was we'll put a hefty tax on high-value real estate sales, mansions. And nobody really, the billionaires who own these mansions, they can afford it, it doesn't matter. And it's going to provide, $1 billion a year towards affordable housing in Los Angeles. And people thought that was a good idea, and a narrow majority voted to approve Measure ULA. What people didn't realize was, number one, it is not really a mansion tax. Yes, it does tax mansions, but it is also an apartment building tax. It is a commercial building tax.
So it's on everything.
It's a tax on everything above $5 million. And if you ever want to build a studio complex in Los Angeles, or a manufacturing complex, or a warehouse complex, those are going to be above $5 million. And so those would all be subject to this tax. It has disproportionate disincentive effects on investment due to the way real estate deals are structured. It's nominally between a 4.5% and a 5.5% tax on sales, depending on where you are in that value at that value level. But because as a real estate, as a builder, my profit may be 10 or 12% of the total deal. That 5.5% cuts my profit in half, which means that now I need to raise twice as much equity. I can only pay them half as much, and it is a disaster for real estate projects. The effect of this, after it passed, the real estate industry kind of woke up and said, this is not good. And there's been a lot of conversation at the theoretical level about, is it good, is it bad, is it raising money, is it not raising money? Now it's been in effect since April of 2023. That's when that's when the tax started getting charged on properties. And what we've seen, we finally have the data, is transactions in the city of Los Angeles have fallen off by 70% over $5 million.
Wow.
By 70%. And people might say, well, this is just the market generally, and it's not. We've looked at transactions over $5 million outside of the city of Los Angeles, and they're tracking perfectly with everything else in the real estate market. Specifically, transactions above $5 million have fallen off a cliff. Development applications in Los Angeles City have fallen off a cliff. And the reason this matters is, one, if people aren't building new manufacturing facilities, if they're not building movie studios, if they're not building apartment buildings, people, working people in Los Angeles are not going to have a place to work or a place to live. It's like mission critical right now that we have to reverse that. The other reason why this is a big deal, and people I don't think thought this through, is because the transfer tax has caused real estate sales and development projects over $5 million to come to a screeching halt in LA. They have actually terminated the key mechanisms by which property tax growth happens. And so to get a little bit in the weeds on this, because of Prop 13, property tax growth only happens at the rate of a maximum of 2% a year if you own a property and you don't build on it. If you sell the property, it gets reassessed at current levels, or if you do new construction, they call it, which could be renovations, it could be whatever. If you improve your property, it gets reassessed at current levels.
So transactions help have more taxes, essentially, because there will be new prices, right?
That's right. If somebody just bought a house and they're paying, $12,000 a year in property taxes, and their next door neighbor, the same house basically, but they've owned it for 30 years and they're paying $1,500 a year in property taxes, it really drives home why property sales are important to the county's property tax business, basically. And so by cutting off transactions at that high level, which drive a lot of the valuation in Los Angeles, by cutting those off by 70%, we've really delivered a major blow to property tax revenue growth in the county. And so this should be a major concern for everybody in Los Angeles. It should be a major concern for the state, because if Los Angeles County runs out of money to fund its schools, its police, its fire, its safety net, the state is the funder of last resort for those things. And right now the state is having a budget crisis. And so I just don't see how we can afford to keep Measure ULA in place right now.
Mott, so what do you think will happen now and in the next 5 years? Do you think these communities will come back?
I do, but I think that more than these communities, we have to think outside the burn areas. Because again, today, everybody who's been displaced in the burn areas is getting absorbed into someplace that didn't burn. And we already had a crisis in the broader region, in the state, in fact, for housing and small businesses. And so my hope is that this tragedy gives the legislators and executives at the local and state level a real reason to have courage in changing the rules, to make it possible to build smarter, build better, to make it, to carry it home. My dream is for Los Angeles to be the sort of city where you could build fourplexes on a walkable street with hardwood floors and giant windows and a front porch. Again, like that's what I want the city to be. We have this strange battle, the strange philosophical battle between people who say it's got to be large single-family homes only, and others who say we want these giant apartment buildings only. And what makes this region great, in my view, is the sort of small-town feel where you've got fourplexes and eightplexes and a little main street with coffee shops and that sort of thing. And so many people want that as a way of life. And so many builders want to build that, and our rules have just made it impossible. And so my hope is that, again, that this tragedy gives people a reason to change the rules, to give people what they want and builders what they want, and let us start building good, walkable neighborhoods again.
You have changed your career now. You're developing specialized kitchens.
Yes.
You're not in the residential development anymore.
Correct.
But you have this care and passion about it.
Yes.
Where does that come from?
You know, I've always loved cities, and I've always been fascinated by what makes them tick. If I could be building the sort of housing that people want and that I want in Los Angeles profitably, I'd be doing it all day long. The reason I'm building kitchens is because I love that too. I love food, and there's a great need for what we're doing. But I want to know that my kids are going to be able to live someplace cool. I want, as I get older and my wife and I become empty nesters, I want to be able to live in a great walkable neighborhood without, thousands of square feet of housing, just, a nice place. And I think this is really what a lot of people want. I'm passionate about it because I think that communities where people can see each other and connect with each other on a daily basis are the things that make us feel alive. We've talked about the loneliness crisis in America and in California, and a lot of that comes from how we've built our communities, that we've built these places where unless you get in your car and drive somewhere, you don't see another human being. The places where you really feel alive, I think, are places where you walk outside your front door and there are people walking their dogs, and maybe there are people sitting at a cafe, and you're having people over for dinner and you forgot the onions and you can run down to the corner market and buy some. I mean, this to me is a lifestyle that so many people want. And in fact, if you look at things like walk score, you'll see people pay a premium to live in walkable neighborhoods, and we should really legalize those once again.
So, Mott, to fix this, what recommendations do you guys have?
The thing that's going to make rebuilding possible is fixing the bureaucracy. And what that means at a really concrete level is being able to process all of the applications for building that are going to come through. Already before the fires, there was a huge log jam of people trying to get stuff built. And now it's just going to be exponentially worse. If you ask most city and county officials what it's going to take to break that log jam and move projects through, they'll tell you, we don't have the staff. We have to double, triple our staff. And that's only true if you keep the same process that we have right now. There are models around the country of different processes that are much less demanding on staff, but get just as good results from a public health and public safety perspective. Even locally, cities like Bellflower, larger cities like San Diego have radically changed their building approval processes to process much more throughput without doubling, tripling their staffing. And what I mean by this is, right now, if you were to go to the city and want to do a small addition for your home, they'd say that requires plan check, and we talked about plan check earlier. So you have to have an architect draw up plans, and then 6 months later they say, okay, go ahead, you can do it. And you've been waiting 6 months for this. And while that plan checker was going through with a red pencil on your plan for a new sunroom at your house, there was an apartment building that could have housed 60 families that was, waiting in line behind you. And so for example, the city of Bellflower here does is something they call architect self-certification. And what that means is if your project is a simple project that an inspector is going to have a lot to say about in the field as you're building it, and there's not a lot of value added by having somebody circle bits of your drawing in red pencil, that a licensed, insured architect who's got a certain number of years of experience can certify their own drawings to start building. Again, the inspector is going to come and make sure you're building code compliant and make sure you've done everything correctly. So there's really no value in making that 60-unit apartment building that actually needs city plan check wait for the plan checker to check your simple sunroom addition. So the city of Los Angeles, Councilmember Nithya Raman just put forward a motion to study self-certification as an option in LA. And the idea here is not, again, that the high-rise, just...
The complex things are self-checked, but the
yes.
simple ones.
Yeah, the idea is take the simple ones out of the plan check process because there's no value, there's no public safety improvement from having them in that process, and clear the decks for the stuff that really needs it. And so that's one thing is self-certification. There are other issues like construction defect liability in California is a big deal. And this is what this means is that if I'm a developer and I'm building a condominium complex, and I think we're going to have to build a lot more condos fast to house all the people that have been displaced and to house all the newcomers who are coming into the state. If I build condominiums, my insurance rates per unit can be as high as $50,000 or $60,000. Wow. And that's basically half of what I would pay to build a whole house in Dallas. It's astronomically high.
Just the insurance.
Just the insurance.
For you as a developer.
For me as a developer.
So you will pass that to the user. You have to.
If the answer is yes, and if I can't, I'm not building it. So that's one of the reasons why housing is so expensive here, because if I can't pass the cost along, I don't actually build. Other states have much more sensible construction defect liability rules, like the state of Washington, the state of Hawaii. And the big difference between building here and building there is here, if a homeowners association in a condo building with an aggressive lawyer constructs a case where they could find some things that might have been done wrong, I automatically have a big payout. And then a third thing is we have decided that for important things like low-income housing, that we're going to make builders pay for that through what we call inclusionary zoning ordinances or linkage fees, or there are a variety of flavors of this. And for those of us like me who believe in a robust public safety net, this is a very frustrating situation, because these rules that require builders, as you're building market rate housing, to also build low-income housing on your own dime, make much too much market rate housing infeasible to build. So it
makes them more expensive.
Makes them more expensive. And again,
you
if
have
I
to
can't
subsidize the other housing.
Yes, exactly. And it means that we're building just a few low-income units a year this way, meaning that people who actually need that housing aren't getting it. So it's a barrier to building, and it's a false solution for the people who really need things. And so if we're going to get going with this rebuilding now, in the wake of the fires, we need a suspension of those rules that make it too expensive to build. It was too expensive to build already, and at least for a time, we need to try something else.
Mott Smith, chairman of the board of Council of Infill Builders. It was great to have you on California Insider.
A pleasure to be here, CMAC. Thank you.
Let us know what your thoughts are on bureaucracy in LA and how the city can solve these problems. You can always reach out to me at siamak@californiainsider.com. You can leave a comment, and I always read your emails and comments. We'll hope to see you next time.